Meg, I'm really happy to welcome you here in Ukraine. This is the first time a $1 million teacher is visiting Ukraine. How did you feel when you found out that you are the winner of the Global Teacher Prize and you are the one who is the main star on the stage?
It was shocking, and even though it's been over 2 years, it's still a surreal experience. I think as a teacher, we're often so humbled by the experiences of our students that we work with every day.
Teachers are humble all over the world.
Exactly.
I assume.
Yeah, and so to be chosen amongst such a group, not only the top 10, but the top 50. I mean, every teacher that gets nominated, their story is inspiring. So the best I can say is I am just first amongst equals. I mean, anybody at that level deserves and is a winner. All teachers are winners. What their work is so often thought of as ordinary, but they're in fact extraordinary once you begin to tap into that story.
When we announced on our Facebook page that Maggie McDonnell is coming, we got a few comments from teachers, which are actually very common comments talking about teachers who travel around the world and give some keynotes or workshops. Teachers asked, when does she have time to teach and to travel at the same time?
Yeah.
How come last month one teacher came, this month another teacher came?
Yeah.
So how do you combine teaching with traveling around the world, and how in general your life changed when you won Global Teacher Prize?
I guess my story might be a little bit unique. When I won the prize, I was actually pregnant. And so I am now in Canada, we have perhaps more generous, what we call maternity or parental leave.
How long is your maternity leave in Canada?
It can be it varies by province. So some provinces are around 9 months. Others, they can extend into what they call a parental leave, which can go on for 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
Depending if you're breastfeeding, depending on your access to daycare facilities, etc.
And one more question, because I know Ukrainian teachers are interested in how it all goes in Canada. Mm-hmm. When you are staying for 2 years, let's say, in the maternity leave, how is it a paid maternity leave?
Part of it, yes. Part of it, no. So depending upon the province you're in, maybe you receive first about 80% of your salary, then about 50% of your salary. Okay, for
how long?
6 months to about 9 months. Mm-hmm. And then afterwards, you do not receive.
Okay, so if you want, you just stay at your maternity leave?
Yeah, and then after about that 9 months, you're not receiving any benefits at that point. But politically, we're starting to raise a conversation about how we can change that policy, and maybe we can extend that longer, or that our partners, our husbands, for example, can also take a parental leave, and so that they're receiving some salary and they're at home with the child. So I'm really thankful to be Canadian in terms of where our how we recognize the importance of a child, early childhood development, mother-child connection, etc. But my school board is tremendously supportive as well of this really unique opportunity, and they really support my travel because they see it as an opportunity for the story of my students and their brilliance and their resilience to be shared on a global stage. And they also see it as a way for them, through me, to connect to a broader part of the world. And typically, probably in 75% of my travel experiences, I will bring colleagues and students with me. And so
I remember you came to the Global Teacher Prize with 3 students of yours.
I think often as teachers, in our education field, sometimes we minimize ourselves as a profession. We would never question whether a doctor is traveling to conferences. We would never question whether somebody with an IT startup background is engaging with the global community and connecting with that. Yet sometimes we think, oh, well, that's not something a teacher should be doing. And I say, when you have that question, then I'd want you to first actually reflect, where do you value a teacher? What type of prestige do you add to that profession? Because if you think that that profession is, for example, not worthy of travel or global engagement or ongoing professional development, then I'm more worried about how you're looking at the value of that profession. Because as was said by Sunny Varkey, behind the Varkey Foundation, no matter the question, education is the answer. Teachers are incredibly important, and we need to break through sometimes our own mindset as teachers. We keep ourselves down, because even within ourselves, we don't celebrate our own profession and our own stories. And I think we should try to reshift this thinking and demand more professional opportunities for teachers in our profession globally.
The story of you as a teacher was the one that was probably even shocking, I would say, because it's a really small Inuit village at the very, very north of Canada.
Yeah.
And I remember you were telling, and I was reading somewhere that even to get to the most civilized places, you need to get the helicopter or whatever. Like it's a very remote area, very remote area. In Ukraine, of course, Ukraine is a much smaller country, but I definitely know that at this course that we are now talking about, we have teachers from small villages around Ukraine. And Kyiv is a place where you can find a lot of possibilities for the teachers' development, while teachers who live 500, 600, 700 kilometers away from Kyiv, they don't have that many possibilities and that many chances to self-develop. Canada is much bigger. And your village is far, far, far away from some central areas. How do teachers in your area self-develop?
I guess, in a sense, one advantage we have is that our education system is more decentralized. So we're a very large country, Canada, in terms of geography, but our education is the mandate of the province. And so at least that begins to help decentralize that.
So what do you mean by decentralization in your case? Do you mean that your school provides you with all the possible teachers' trainings, or the province?
I mean the province. So the province is responsible for education. So at least it is not one centralized government in the capital city of Ottawa trying to manage education across the breadth of Canada. At least we have our main focal points within a province, so somewhat more accessible geographically, even though, again, our provinces are huge by all means. As much as possible in the area where I work, because it's exceptionally remote, it can only be accessed by plane. Sometimes you need to fly 5-6 hours to arrive just to one village of 300 or 400 people. So far, our best strategies are actually, when it comes to teacher development and teacher training, we make partnerships with universities that are in the bigger cities, such as Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, etc. And we work with their professors and their faculties to deliver that content on site in the village.
Okay, so they might send online.
Online or preferably in person, because our internet systems in the high north and the Arctic are quite weak to...
Teachers don't even have a chance to watch the online courses.
challenging. You're going to watch a lot of that symbol of it's loading, but you're not going to see, that video. So I can open, Word documents, but for me to stream a video might be very difficult at this point. We hope in the next few years that's going to open up. So we'll organize to send trainers into the communities to work with teachers there.
So do they come to your village?
Yeah, and then we'll try to bring teachers from the villages together. So there might be from 10 different villages. We'll try to bring them together to a regional point, for an intensive 2 or 3 week training program or session. And we also try to develop, key leaders or trainers within that pool of teachers so that they can be continuously taking a role in training their colleagues and peers, for sure.
Is there any mandatory amount of hours teachers need to go through the trainings?
I'm sure, absolutely, because it would be have to be certified by our ministries and by the universities that we're working in partnership with, but I'm not an expert on those details, so I don't know exactly the number of hours, but teachers might be, for example, trained up to the certificate level, to the diploma level, or to a full degree level.
I remember when you won the prize and you were on the stage, we all were crying when you were saying that I don't remember exactly how it sounded, but I remember very much the sense you wanted to share. That when you work in an ordinary school, this is one thing. But when you come to school and you see the empty table, and you know that this empty table is empty not because the child is absent, but because he or she committed suicide, I remember how we all were feeling. And you working in such a depressive area, in an area where there is a high level of crime, high level of young girls becoming mothers very early, of committing suicides. What do you, as a teacher, do to support the kids and to fight against those problems?
I think in any context where you see challenges, sometimes we're so trained to see some of the negative things. We have to remember, for anything to be in that environment, it must be incredibly resilient at the same time. And I love trying to tap into that strength and that hope. And I find that incredibly inspiring too. People will often maybe ask me, how do you stay in a community which is so often portrayed as struggling, as the headlines are all about addictions, about trauma, about suicide? And I say, we are so good at counting the negative, and we're not very good at counting and making visible the positive. And I've had students come to me and say directly, because of you, because of your teaching, because of the programs, because of this school, I had a suicide plan, but I walked away from it and I chose life. And those stories don't make headlines, right? When a kid chooses, when a girl doesn't have a baby at the age of 16, it's not a headline, right? But teachers, we know we're making that difference because we're connected with kids and they tell us those stories. And that's incredibly motivating for you to sort of continue to be committed to those kids. It refuels you. I tend to find when you work with a community versus even for a community, but I mean actually work with them, especially as an outsider that I am, you are also emboldened by the strength that they have, and that supports you, Absolutely. When community leaders know I've lost a student and they see me in a vulnerable state, they also reach out to me and console me and offer me advice, and we boost each other, through that process, right?
Very often we have discussions that teacher is a teacher, and teachers say, I'm a math teacher. My task is to teach math. Or I am an English language teacher. My task is to teach English. Out of your story, I can see that you don't see yourself, first of all, as the subject teacher, but as the person who looks much deeper than the subject itself.
I think the simplest way to say that is we don't teach math, we teach kids. In my context, because of historical issues, because of colonial policies, because of underfunding, there's tremendous gaps in the social fabric of the community where my students live. And those challenges are going to come to my class every single day because a teacher works with people, with kids every single day. A doctor works with people in a crisis, okay? You're in an accident, the person comes in, it's a trauma, it's an acute crisis. After a week, they're gone. Okay, they're discharged from the hospital, it's over. A teacher is dealing with those same issues of food insecurity, of homelessness, of violence, of addictions, of low self-confidence every single day. And if we choose to ignore it, I don't even think we ever get to teach math, right? That's true.
The last thing in our today's conversation I would like to touch. Everything I'm asking you goes from pains of Ukrainian teachers.
Yeah.
And we are really interested in your international experience, especially your story, because you are working in a remote area.
Yeah.
Often Ukrainian teachers say that those teachers who work in bigger cities, they have much more opportunities and much more resources than teachers working in villages and working in remote areas. And this course that we are talking about, it's about practical instruments and practical things teachers can do without additional money or without any other additional resources. Can you share with us some of the practical things you can do and teachers in Ukraine can do with kids to teach, first of all, not math, but to teach kids?
Yeah. So often we look at a glass of water and we see it's half empty. And we don't recognize that it's also half full. And that sort of takes a change of mindset. And it's easy to go to a rural area and count all the problems. Oh, it's isolated. There's not so many resources here, et cetera, et cetera. There's not as much diversity. But you can also at the same time see amazing strength. There's probably incredible family connections. There's probably beautiful nature around. There's probably a strength of history that's unique to the fabric of that place that is so worth exploring. I try to take what I call and something you could do with your students is actually called asset-based community mapping. Okay, so you could ask your students to go out in their community and count all the resources in their community. Identify whether it's a football field, whether it's a community kitchen, whether it's some farmland, whether you can even identify talents and resources and interests. Maybe you have grandmothers who have amazing traditional sewing skills. Maybe you have young people who have a lot of free time. Okay, that's an asset. That's a resource, right? It could be used unfortunately to fall into an area of boredom or addictions, but it's a lot of free time and availability. And when you start to reframe and engage your kids to see the beautiful things in your community, then you can try to harness that and build some unique opportunities. So in my community, I was told, oh, your students, they just want to smoke weed, they're into drugs, they're not interested in school, and they just want to walk around all night. But I saw them as longing for connection, having a lot of available time, and probably wanting to adopt a healthier lifestyle, but needing direction. So let's do sports programs. Let's do a basketball workshop.
I can't do sports programs. I don't have enough facilities for that.
I've worked in refugee camps, where kids have survive on 800 calories a day, where we have to make a soccer ball from plastic bags. Do you know what I mean? That the kids make themselves, that they wrap together and tie together. I would encourage you to think that there can be that possibility, and it's not always easy, right? Initially, it can be struggling. Maybe the kids are complaining. Maybe their participation isn't there. Sometimes when I started, for example, a running group involves maybe a pair of sneakers or maybe even not a pair of sneakers, right? I had kids running in boots and shoes. Sometimes it would just be one kid. But if you consistently do it, and most importantly, if you use your humanity to connect with that kid, which is really almost what all kids want, is that they want that connection. I went from having one kid running with me, to now having hundreds of kids in the region running with me, with other coaches, independently. And again, running, all you need is space, and ideally a pair of sneakers or some type of footwear.
What other practical things are you doing? I was amazed by the smoothie story.
Yes, we have a huge issue with food insecurity.
What do you mean by food insecurity?
It means many of our students arrive at school hungry, or do not have access to healthy food options. And so I saw that as an opportunity to, teach about preparing healthy foods. And I saw my students as like a little army I had, to work with. So I'm like, let me use them and our time together. This can be one of the valuable skills we learn, which is both food preparation, budgeting, how to shop for healthy foods, and also that act of service or kindness, to share what you have with your fellow peers. So every day we would get together and we would make smoothies or a healthy sandwich, or we would prepare traditional fish and we would serve it to the whole school body. And often my students were seen as the bullies in the school. They were former dropouts. They were in the alternative program. They had a lot of negative stereotypes associated with them. But by every day getting them to do this act of kindness, it transformed themselves and their relationships with the kids. We can always think, we want to always create meaningful opportunities of responsibility and leadership for our students. So if you're in a school of 5-year-olds to 18-year-olds, get those older teenagers involved with the younger kids. At recess, get them running activities to engage those younger kids. Get them, once a week to lead a story time or literature time with your 8-year-olds. This is beautiful things. It empowers them. It gives them self-confidence. It makes them realize they do have skills. They are good at something. They can read. And then they're sharing sharing that with a younger kid, there's so much opportunity for sort of creating cycles within the school. You know?
The question is either you are ready to look for those opportunities or you are not ready to. This is a philosophical question. I mean,
I think it really, you know, depends upon our frameworks, and we need to see we need to recognize challenges, but we need to see the opportunities as well. And we have to recognize there's strength within ourselves and there's strength within our students, and we have to seize agency, you know, to create that change.
Thank you, Maggie. It was very inspiring.
Yeah.